6, this Frostbite is an easy bottom. That card would be very close to irrelevant.
There are no targets for that in the early game here. So we're going to see both players taking a mulligan here. Keeping 6 cards, throwing that Frostbite to the bottom. And now we're looking at a Bone Crusher Giant who has the potential to do some stomping. And a Goldspan Dragon for Brad. So that's a lot of good early stuff. That 2 damage is probably going to go to face if there's nothing else to be done, though. Just because, hey, guess what? You got 2 damage. What else are you going to do with it?
Yep, pretty much. I'll point out that this Mystical Dispute was actually a pretty nice draw because Paulo here has mulligan, so it's a lot harder to kind of power through a card like Mystical Dispute when you mulligan because you just need 10 mana to make your ultimatum happen.
And while the deck is good at ramping, you've got those Binding the Old Gods, you've got some Cultivates, I believe, in this version of the list. 10 mana is still a hard goal to reach.
Yeah. And you see Brad here playing the island and passing because Yorion is good enough. So because of that fact, Brad has to essentially kind of is not going to be able to play this Bone Crusher Giant. It's unlikely to deal a ton of damage because of the presence of cards like Heartless Act and Eliminate. So at that point, if Bone Crusher Giant doesn't do a ton, well, you can't let Paulo have a 4/5 flyer in play. That blocks the 3/4, that blocks the 4/4 dragon. So that's why you see that decision there for Brad to pass. Yorion being put into hand by Paulo last turn.
Yes, with that Yorion actually as a flyer, it's not just a Blinken engine. You really do have to consider keeping the air clear. And because it is a blue spell, Mystical Dispute will be discounted by 2 generic mana, which means that Brad has the potential here to play the Bone Crusher Giant and still hold up the dispute.
Yeah. This should meet a Heartless Act since... actually, I say it should be the Heartless Act. At the same time, this is Paulo's only interaction at instant speed currently. So this is actually quite a hefty cost, even though it makes sense to fire it off here.
Take out that 4/4 on the ground, but that means there won't be any removal for that Goldspan Dragon. And Goldspan Dragon is hasty. It's able to hit the turn it comes down. And if you do try to target it with removal, its controller gets a treasure, which can be used to pay for counter spells or other ways to protect it while it's on the board.
Yeah, and this Yorion's actually going to be really powerful here because Brad's kind of forced to counter it and to hope for no emergent ultimatum. And let's be real, there's 2 in hand, so honestly, Brad has nothing
7
but
mana
this
next
dragon.
turn. What are you going to do? You're going to play your dragon because there's nothing else. And It actually looks like Brad is flooding quite a bit. Still 3 lands in hand here.
Yep. And this can happen, right? You can essentially force a counterspell. There's no pressure. So you're not even leveraging that counterspell into a game-winning position. And at this point, Paulo is just making sure that the mana count for this Emergent Ultimatum is correct with the pathway.
Yes, with that very specific cost of the double black, double blue, and triple green, you do have to be very, very forward-thinking when you are playing your lands during an ultimatum game. It's very tricky because sometimes you'll be thinking, oh, it'd be great next turn if I had 3 blue, but that might cut you off from 3 green just because these pathway lands don't generate 2 types of mana.
That's actually a good point. In Historic, this was a lot easier to play because you have the Ravnica duels, whereas in or the Shock lands. Whereas the pathways, it's not the same. Having access to Zagoth Triumph really changes a lot.
And now the ultimatum is allowing for the selection of 3 monocolored spells, which Brad will get to choose 2 of to be cast. Facing down. Ooh, facing down that choice, it's just going to be a concession.
Yeah, plus there's the ultimatum in hand. So if you ever gave the Alrund's Epiphany, Paulo would just win. So yeah, that match really came down to Brad maybe flooding a bit, but Paulo just having kind of understanding how the matchup is, making sure to maximize your threats. So Yorion plus the Emergent Ultimatums, and that's it, right? Brad only had 1 piece of interaction.
So we're seeing all these counter spells come in, the Disdainful Strokes, the Negates. Brad is ready to counter those ultimatums this time and ready to steal some of those big creatures. We also see Paulo is actually bringing in some big creatures as well. That Elder Gargaroth I mentioned before, the reach is very relevant here, but we also see 2 Coma coming in from the board.
Yeah, Coma is really pretty good here. You can't counter it, so it forces Brad to kind of be interactive. And that's also why we see the Akroan War, is Coma doesn't stop that card. So it doesn't give it gives it indestructible, not hexproof. So the Akroan War on Coma, really good interaction for Brad, since after all you get a bunch of the serpents on the way as well. So that's a way to leverage pressure. And if you don't have it, it just means Paulo gets to play Coma and run away with the game the second that card lands. Whereas, Brad would rather, be able to take over.
Yes, dealing with the Coma is very, very difficult. This is a 6/6 uncounterable snake that every upkeep, both yours and your opponent's, spits out a serpent token, and it allows you to sacrifice a serpent. Doesn't necessarily need to be those tokens, to protect itself by either giving itself indestructible or by tapping a permanent your opponent controls and disabling its activated abilities. This gets weird because you can even tap down your opponent's lands. It's not just creatures.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do with Coma. It also kind of soft counters Alrund's Epiphany, since if you cast that card, they get an extra serpent.
Extra upkeep, extra snake.
Yeah, and Brad, I mean, the Faceless Havens will help put a bit of pressure. Unfortunately, the Galazeth Prismari, if Paulo found a land here, you get to cultivate, and binding the old gods is really problematic. I actually like this play from Brad a lot. That was actually super smart.
Yeah. So this is a counter on the land. So cultivate would have put a land onto the battlefield and one into hand, which would have set up PV not just for generally ramping up to the ultimatum, but specifically that binding the old gods, which would have caused kind of a cascade of ramp. Now PV needs to draw land and didn't.
Yeah, and that changes the game completely. Had Paulo drawn a land, had Paulo resolved that cultivate or drawn a land, binding the old gods comes back. There's no threat. Now Paulo can't deal with this Galazeth Prismari. Doesn't have an answer to it, and Brad gets to cascade that with an Alrund's Epiphany or a Goldspan Dragon, whichever makes sense this turn. Yeah, so Mystical Disputing that cultivate, very heads up play and really changes the game.
Now we're going to see another treasure get made by the Goldspan Dragon, and these treasures can be either sacrificed for 2 mana while that Goldspan Dragon is out, or tap for spell mana. And here comes the Binding the Old Gods. That's going to destroy, I believe, the Goldspan Dragon here. There isn't a guaranteed way to protect it. The Shark Typhoon could be cycled for 0. But then drawing a counter spell might not necessarily happen. But you may as well get the full use of those treasures out and make a 2/2 Shark. Draw a card.
This actually puts PV down to 1. Because you get Epiphany.
The birds are going to swing in next turn, too. So you've got 5 damage this turn, 7
Actually, no, this
next.
is lethal. You have the Faceless Haven. Yeah.
Oh,
so Brad
and the land getting animated. There is enough snow mana to animate that Faceless Haven. Playing those Volatile Fjords. Once again, the big brain play from Brad. And now both players have a win.
Yep. So, yep. And it all came down to having the dispute for Cultivate. Otherwise, Paulo would have been able to take over with Binding the Old Gods, and I don't think Brad would have been able to come back. But the fact is, Paulo bricked on that turn, needing the land, didn't get it, and Brad just capitalized.
So we're going to take a quick break while we wait for these players to sideboard going into Game 3. And now it's time for Game 3. This is between PVDDR and Brad and Nelson. Each player has a win here and is trying to rack up those points. PVDDR is in the lead in the standings, and Brad, if he wins, is going to put not himself, but the other players, I believe Nassif, Reed Duke, Seth Manfield, closer to getting that World's qualification this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, at the end of the day, a win's a win, right? And you need that match win for the first split, right? Brad's setting up for the future. You got to get those wins
There's
in while you
another
can.
split coming up. Yeah. And we're seeing 4 duress coming in here. That's the hand hate from PVDDR. He's got to get rid of those counter spells before they can land.
Yeah, both these hands are kind of weak from both players. PV has 2 color. Here. Yeah, well, I mean, Brad's just going to mulligan, but Paulo's hand is closer. I believe it's a mulligan. No real mana acceleration except binding the old god. Really? I mean, you're on the play and you have binding the old gods, but you have 2 of your colors. I guess you have interaction, but this could go wrong. This could go very wrong.
Well, there's a strategy, and it's called believing in the heart of the cards. Sometimes what you need to do is you need to say, oh, yes, my deck will give me my 3rd color of mana, whether it be green or black here, depending on what the setup is. The deck shall provide.
Yeah, from experience, that's true. I think that's fine. It's also that being down a card, I think, in a matchup like this can be hard. But yeah, so here you're very tempted to play Wolf Willow Haven, right? So getting a green source, because you get to accelerate into this coma no matter what. But yeah, there is a downfall. Like if you don't get black, 2 of these cards. I mean, the Heartless Act will get there. It's more like binding the old gods is a card you're not going to want to have. But yeah, here's the pathway. Everything works out perfectly.
What did I just say? The black mana, it showed up all according to plan. Wolf Willow Haven ramping up to 5 mana next turn, and that could be a Gargaroth or a binding.
Yeah, and this is really hard for Brad because now you kind of have to pass. You can't expressive iteration. And
you have to be ready on that counter spell.
Yeah, and Paulo drew a really powerful card there in Cultivate. Like that was because otherwise, you know, it's playing Gargaroth or not, or you can even play Binding as a ramp spell. This unlocks Coma far too early for Brad to be able to do anything about it. It's really hard to not let this resolve because you have a hard counter for Ultimatum, so it's specifically bad only against Coma. So I understand why Brad lets this resolve, but it's going to be really painful.
And Brad is just hoping that it's not a Coma in hand. And we did see PV kind of expecting there to be a potential counter spell there with a Foretold card. It's either going to be Saw It Coming, the counter spell, or Alrund's Epiphany, which is going to be relevant for a few turns.
Yeah, so interestingly here, discards for a treasure. I think that makes sense. Please put... Okay, if you're a Brad fan, this Accroing War needs to go to hand. Like, there's no other outcome.
That is the card that is going to take the Coma and deal with it.
Right, and that decision to, early on make the treasure is going to have a large impact because you get to do a Accroing War with counter magic backup, which avoids the binding the old gods and gets a Coma Cosmos Serpent. Now, it is true, Paulo does get access to a Serpent, so can tap one of Brad's permanents in order to kind of get rid of this counter spell. So Paulo really has the upper hand here, though, because his Mystical Dispute wouldn't stop the binding. So this is actually kind of rough for Brad because Paulo essentially gets to tap the treasure here or the land. Yeah, and you see Paulo do that.
One-time only use unless you have Galazeth Prismari out. So the Accroing War only controls the target creature while it is on the battlefield. Once it either gets sacrificed for the purposes of, well, it has run out of chapters, or if it gets destroyed by something like Binding the Old Gods, it's no longer going to be active. But no matter what, we are going to see Brad get a single snake.
Yep. But unfortunately, you can't make the Crowan War indestructible. So that's
no, but you
unfortunate.
can mess up your opponent's mana a little bit. Do you keep the snake, or do you sacrifice it to cut off Paulo Vitor from making multiple actions this turn?
The card you're worried about here is Binding the Old Gods, so I don't think there's much purpose here in using it up, essentially, because it's still castable. Paulo's only considering here what else to do with Binding. Binding the Old Gods is going to get played on the Crowan War this turn. I'd be surprised if that doesn't happen here. I mean, all of Paulo's lines match that's going to happen. Just determining, do I keep mana up? In that case, I can play the Temple because I'm not going to play Omen of the Sea right away, so I can scry first. Yeah, and you see Brad's there is a consideration of, should I have waited, a turn on the Crowan War, but there would have been extra Serpents, so, play it as fast as you can, hope for the best. The best didn't happen.
There's the Binding on the Crowan War, returning Coma to its rightful home.
Yeah. Also, Yorion put in hand. So, if you require some more a Crowan War destruction, the Binding shall provide again.
Yes, it's Snake City here. Coma, very, very hard to deal with, especially in a deck that has no way to exile it from the battlefield.
Yeah, and this is actually kind of funny, right? Brad had the side coming, had the decision to get rid of the Cultivator, decided not to. I mean, you would have lost the side coming. And you wouldn't have been able to protect the Crowan War, but it is rough, right? It's there's Comas, there's only 2 of them, and you have a hard counter spell. The matchup's going to last a while. You probably want that counter spell for Emergent Ultimatum, but if Paulo has exactly Coma in hand, like in this spot, it's bad. Brad made a calculated risk. It didn't pan out. It's kind of Paulo drew everything that was needed right on time. Let's be honest. There were 5 lands. It's going to be no other lands in hand. Drew top deck the cultivation that you need. Everything kind of came out Paulo's way this game.
It's that luck strat. I'm telling you, the black mana showing up from the deck was a gift. It said, you have treated me, the Sultai Ultimatum deck, so well, I will reward you with this mana. And there is a Heartless Act coming down on Gelazeth Prismari. Do you protect your dragon? Do you protect your only creature that can possibly get through this current board? Let's ignore the fact that there's like a Yorion and an Elder Gargaroth in PVDDR's hand. Just ignore that part.
Yeah. I mean, Paulo did play the land spell, so that there's no extra mana. So, I mean, you can counter the Yorion with the Mystical Dispute here. So this does leverage this side coming more. But yeah, I will point out, yes, by the way, yeah, Paulo did get lucky, and I mentioned it. But the truth is, too, Paulo did, tap the land and kind of, still played sharp, right? You play the Coma, you made sure to recognize there's a Foretold card that's very high chance to be a side coming. I'm not going to take the risk, and I'm just going to make sure that the, get rid of the land so that the side coming cannot operate.
So now Coma swinging in for 6 damage. It's only going to take a couple swings between Coma and those Serpent tokens to get some lethal. And we're also seeing the Volatile Fjord get tapped. That's a floating blue mana.
Yeah, so this plays around something like Disdainful Stroke or Negate. Stroke specifically in this spot, since Elder Gargaroth was cast, that's another nightmare for Brad. So yeah, Paulo knowing how to leverage kind of that long-term advantage. And I think that's the thing, right? Is like, yes, drew well and all that, but also it's how do I make sure I leverage my my advantage, make sure I don't give it up, make sure that I close the door on Brad Nelson. So yeah, that's why you see the victory, is that combination, right? Is at this level of play, yeah.
He's got it. He's got the win there. Paulo Vitor, Damo de Rosa getting the win in this round. Now super secured in that point lead. But I believe that he already has a qualification for the World Championship.
Yeah, we're reminded by Elite Spellbinder that he is the world champion. And as the world champion in Chidal, he gets to get an invite to it. So I believe that essentially if Paulo did get the World Championship seat again, which, let's be real, is starting to look like a good possibility, then you're looking at essentially the MPL gauntlet getting an extra slot. So that's, for place in the MPL gauntlet, that makes that tournament very, very attractive all of a sudden. So, for the people in the middle of the standings, they're going, Paulo, Paulo, Paulo.
Yeah, because this is giving them another chance at getting that entry during the gauntlet. So we're going to be taking a break and then coming back with more of round 7. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the League Weekend coverage. I'm Amy the Amazonian here with Eduardo Sedilek, and we're about to go into round 7 for the Rivals League. We've got a match between LSV and Matt Sperling.
Yeah, I mean, 2 players here at the top of the standings. Luis had a rough weekend in Standard. Really like the historic take on it, but really the star of the show here is Matt Sperling, top of the standings, and just has to consolidate today. If you get to leverage those 2 wins ahead of the field, then Matt Sperling gets to essentially lock that World Championship slot. And that'd be incredible already. Like, just making that event, that 16-player tournament, and having to do it through like a plethora of the best players in the world is incredible.
Yeah, and you've got Matt Sperling not just in the lead, but in a big lead. He's currently got 43 points with the runner-up, that's Sitka, with 41. It's going to be so hard for anybody to catch up with him today. And we also have a mirror match here. It's going to be Sultai Ultimatum versus Sultai Ultimatum. It is a mirror match.
Yeah, and they generally test together, which means you're not even talking slight differences. Full I get told 75 card mirror. It's actually a 95 card mirror, just because Yorion is a thing on these days.
These are 80 card decks, which means that you have a bit of increased variance, but you end up having this great companion, Yorion, who you can move into your hand using the 3 mana ability, and it can blink these good high-value permanents. You've got some blink value from this Quandrix Cultivator, Binding, and, of course, Omen and Kiora Best the Sea Gods.
Yep, and if you're wondering how the mirror works, it's about speed, especially game 1, where there's a very small amount of interaction. You got a stroke, a dispute, and a negate. That's actually more interaction than most Sultai Ultimatum decks do for the mirror match in the main deck. And post-board, you got more interaction, but fundamentally it's about speed. It's around ramping as quickly as you can and get Ultimatum or post-board Coma Cosmos Serpent. Coma's existence might mean that we still see Extinction Event post-board, just because it is one of the cards that can actually deal with Coma. Even though the tokens stay around, you got to deal with that 6/6. And not much else does.
Well, there's a lot to see going on here, and I'm actually wondering if the two players will sideboard very similarly. They did test together, which means that you may end up seeing some very similar sideboard plans. Of course, being on the play and on the draw, a couple things to consider there, but since neither deck is very aggressive, being the same deck, it is much less of a concern. And now let's get into the match. We've got the two players looking at their opening hands now.
I think, by the way, if you ever want to watch a historic, while we wait for the setup, right, there's a lot of ramping. We're going to see the setup. If you ever want to watch an entertaining match in Magic's history, I think it was the finals of Pro Tour Dark Ascension featured two Primeval Titan ramp decks. And both players spend more time, were so fast playing that they spend more time shuffling each other's decks, searching for ramp, than any other activity in the match. It's actually a really entertaining match to watch, even if you understand nothing of what's going on from just a pure execution perspective.
It's prime time for prime time.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Primeval Titan would... Actually, I guess you would play it in the Ultimatum decks, but there are a lot less utility lands than back then. I mean, Luis Scott-Vargas is on the play. That's already +1 land, but Matt Sperling gets to respond back with Cultivate. And there's a Disdainful Stroke. So right now, Matt is actually quite ahead, I feel, because of that combination of having a counterspell for an Ultimatum plus having access to more ramp. I think Matt Sperling is firmly ahead in this game.
Well, we've got both players getting that turn through Wolf Willow Haven. That sets up for some extra ramp. But yeah, Matt does have the follow-up Cultivate.
Yeah. And Yorion Sky Nomad, when you saw the Izzet Dragons list, that was going to have trouble against the 4/5. Not the case here. You have a ton of Heartless Sacks that aren't doing anything else. So Matt, not really worried about Yorion coming into play or doing anything. Just going to focus on your own game plan. I mean, right now, neither player has the actual star of the show, the Emergent Ultimatum. But again, Matt has Omen of the Sea now and plenty of mana.
Yes, yeah. There is a way now to stop some of that ramp. Binding the Old Gods only has one target here, and it is that Wolf Willow Haven. So making it so that land now only taps for 1 mana again. And Binding Old Gods will also give LSV ramp next turn by getting a forest from the deck. And what's fun about Binding the Old Gods is it doesn't care what kind of forest you get. So you can end up grabbing a 3rd Triome from the deck.
Yeah. If people have played a while, you might remember Movali Acid Moss, which that's basically what Binding the Old Gods is doing. So it was destroy target land and get a forest. That card would actually be one of the best possible cards in Standard for these Ultimatum decks. In the mirror match, you get to kill their Wolf Willow Haven land and they get your own forest. But yeah, here, Matt did draw Wolf Willow Haven to kind of come back and now has interaction. Gets to either Heartless Act if Luis goes for the Yorion but still, is it even worth playing this Wolf Willow Haven? After all, Luis gets to Yorion next turn and get rid of it again. So Matt's position here is, look, what's the point? I don't want to give value to this Yorion. So okay, if Luis blinks the Binding the Old Gods, it's like as if Yorion kind of played a rampant growth. But it's not the end of the world where I also lose a card in the process.
Yeah, playing the Wolf Willow Haven there would have just made for an extra target for the Binding. And we're going to see Elspeth's Nightmare, another saga coming down here. And that first chapter of the saga doesn't have any targets here. There are no creatures of power 2 or less on the board. But the second and third parts are much more relevant here. Especially that second one. You get to look at your opponent's hand and cause them to discard a non-creature spell.
Yeah, and I mean, Luis is converting, not a great hand. You see these free removal spells into gold, essentially. With Yorion being able to blink the Elspeth's Nightmare, that would be an extra, duress-esque effect. So, yeah, kind of leveraging it and setting yourself up for the top deck, right? At the end of the day, you can't, if you don't have the card, you're expecting to draw it, so might as well plan for that.
And now, while the binding won't be able to be blinked next turn because it will be sacrificed, there is the potential to get 2 discards off of that Elspeth's Nightmare.
Yep. And here, Matt is just setting up where, fundamentally, you get hit by Elspeth's Nightmare. If Luis has the ultimatum, probably takes the stroke. If not, might take the ultimatum here. Drawing the negate actually makes it closer, but I still feel like you want to take the emergent ultimatum here. I don't think the Yorion compounds a bunch of advantage. There is the option to take the stroke and then play the Yorion and plan to take the ultimatum. But the problem is, then you have to burn your negate on the ultimatum, and that negate stops any possible top decks.
And we're going to see the Disdainful Stroke dropped. So Yorion can land on the battlefield, and the negate gets held up for the emergent ultimatum. And now, Matt must know. He knows there's 2 mana up. There's got to be a way to stop the negate. And we also saw a fun play there, moving the Wolf Willow Haven onto a different land. So there's technically 3 mana up for LSV.
Yeah. That said, Matt doesn't, yeah, you might as well. It's tough. You can fire off the ultimatum here, though, I feel, because if it gets countered, it's getting a relevant card out of Luis's hand. And then you can foretell the Epiphany, and then you lose the Heartless Act, which can be problematic, because now you don't have an answer to the 4/5, but you still have a Yorion in hand. The Valkyrie doesn't do much, but you can always draw Binding the Old Gods. That would get you the Ketria Triumph that allows you to cast Tybalt. So... yeah, might even start with the Heartless Act on Yorion, but Luis has full information apart from this Epiphany. Matt could also fire off the Epiphany.
Yep, Matt has 9 mana. He can make 2 moves here, using that Heartless Act or Valky, and of course Alberin's Epiphany or Emergent Ultimatum. In a deck where they know the other player doesn't have much in the way of creatures, Valky does not actually do very much for them.
Luis with the Yorgo.
Oh, some sass in the emote game here. And there is the Emergent Ultimatum being negated.
Yep.
And Alberin's Epiphany foretold.
Yep. By the way, smart cookies decide to just disable emotes. Avoid this problem altogether.
No, if I can't do my Professor Onyx doing the little hitting the thing against her hand, then it's not even worth playing.
Oh, well, that's a little different. You're on the pro emote game.
Yeah, I've got the Will looking at math. It's very powerful. You make a mistake, Will's looking at math. Your opponent makes a mistake, Will looking at math. You have no idea what's going on, Will's looking at math.
That Triome, by the way, doesn't look that great because you're like, well, Matt's flooded, so that's not good. It's red mana. You get to cast Tybalt with this card.
Yep, that Triome is going to make it so not just Valky is castable there. That's the other side is Tybalt. You've got a Planeswalker who's able to exile cards and play those exiled cards.
Yep. And that's also why you saw Luis's reaction there. That's to that Triome realizing that Tybalt's going to be something. Looking at Pestilence Haze with, look, if Tybalt minuses, at least I get to get rid of it.
There's the Heartless stack. There can only be one Yorion on this battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, Heartless Act has very little utility in this matchup, so might as well convert it. And
there goes the graveyard.
Yeah. It can be useful, right, because of the Polukranos escape, if that happens.
Well, if you are a Valky, I feel the Polukranos has to be the target here.
Let's see. Well, I have a better proposition for you, Amy.
Okay, is it the Emergent Ultimatum that just got drawn?
Yeah, that just seems better to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an Emergent Ultimatum. There's no counter spells left for LSV here. That's going to resolve if it gets cast.
Yeah. And, you could argue, and Matt knows that there's nothing else, so. What just happened here?
Ooh,
Matt got timered.
I don't. Yes, he did. So if you look on the left there, he has no timers left. LSV also
Well,
giving a
no,
kind of a
no.
puzzling
There's no
look.
timers left, but it's still Matt's turn. He must have clicked on the confirm button too quickly.
Oh. We're going to see if we can get a replay to see exactly what happened there. No, Matt clearly has some time left in the turn. It's the first main phase right here. That ultimatum just didn't happen. Failed to select cards, maybe misclicked.
Yeah, probably just clicked on confirm.
This is a great example of it happens to all of us.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, Matt's playing for the World Championships, and the confirm button got clicked before you select the cards. It's very yeah. This is very painful.
And we do see
Okay,
another
we gotta
ultimatum there, right? Time walk. They always had it. There's a small chance here, but it's still going to be hard. Being at 2 life is not where you want to be.
All right. Let's hope that this time the emergent ultimatum does resolve correctly.
Okay, right. And we see Matt's going to be very careful. Gonna keep away from that submit button.
Yeah. The third card's actually tough here because Vorinclex, is likely going to do nothing. Because of Heartless Axe. So then the question is, what else do you get? And with Tybalt in hand, well, the thing is, though, Gargaroth also doesn't do anything. So you got Extinction Event after all, right? You got Yorion and Pelucranos. You get to get rid of the Pelucranos this way.
You have to deal with the fact that there are 2 lethal attackers, and you don't have removal for either of them unless you have an extra turn.
Yeah. So Luis is going, if I give like Extinction Event and Cura Best of Sea God, can I win the game? Because then Matt doesn't get to untap essentially, right? But the thing is, if Cura Best of Sea God and Extinction Event are given, then you remove the Yorion. If it's Epiphany and Extinction Event, you can remove the Pelucranos. So it's about the context, the fact that you can choose based on what Luis's chooses. Makes this Alren's Epiphany much better. So yeah, I like getting rid of Cure the Best of Sea God because it's the most powerful effect. Here you can remove the Pelucranos because you have an extra turn.
Extinction Event, taking out the card that could come back from the graveyard.
Yeah. Might as well fire off this Elspeth's Nightmare if you have the mana. I guess not. Matt only had 2 mana, so that's why you don't see Elspeth's Nightmare fired off here.
Now we're going to see a scry from the Omen of the Sea. And these 2 birds are potential future blockers if that Yorion does not get immediately exiled. And there is also a second Alren's Epiphany to keep taking these turns. And we see a Binding the Old Gods on top of the library. There is enough mana for Binding and Alren's Epiphany here, which means that Matt can keep drawing this out to build up a comeback.
Yeah, and I like firing off first the Epiphany to get information. Now, it does tell Luis, with these Heartless Acts, I might have to fire them on birds. But yeah. I like also doing the Elspeth's Nightmare here. Make sure the hand has nothing. You can Binding later. Actually, yeah, get the discard. But now you don't get to cast Tybalt with this line.
Well, you can always taking out the Petulant Haze. Here comes Tybalt.
Yeah.
Because Tybalt is removal.
Yes. By the way, Tybalt does have a pretty nifty emblem.
Yes. So whenever you exile a card with Tybalt's controller can play that card. So let's say that was a minus instead. Let's say that Tybalt minus there and exile the Yorion. Cool. That's Matt's Yorion for the rest of the game.
Yep.
And those 2 Heartless Acts, it wouldn't feel good to have to use them on a bird, but drawing your creature removal in a mirror match is unlucky for LSV.
Yeah. By the way, something funny is that Elspeth's Nightmare for chapter is actually a drawback here. because you can't ultimate Tybalt really now.
Well, you can, but there won't be enough. There won't be much fuel there. It's just, oh, well, I'm exiling something not with Tybalt, so those cards are just gone.
Yep. Might still see a Tybalt plus here because there's a Binding the Old Gods, and there's a lot of, the opportunity here of getting a removal spell is really high. I mean, Matt is still cold to a Vorinclex. Like, a Vorinclex would just win the game for Luis. It's a 6/6 Trampler with Ace. That's all you need. That literally would end the game.
Yeah, it would. There's not enough birds here on the battlefield to prevent 6 trampling damage. And we're going to see another Elspeth's Nightmare come down here. That's going to hit a card in hand next turn. And I wonder if there's consideration for casting this Cultivate to thin the deck versus bluffing, holding the mana up.
It's possible. I don't know if there was an other out. Oh, well.
Nope. That's going to be the game going to Matt Sperling.
That was a strange game of Magic, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, the ultimatum that didn't happen, followed by the ultimatum that did, made for some interesting gameplay here. And it does show that, like, you shouldn't give up if you make a mistake. Like, people do make mistakes. Even the pros make mistakes. Sometimes they're dexterity mistakes. Sometimes they're misplays. But they all are recoverable. And you shouldn't just give up on yourself. And don't get tilted if you think you're behind.
Yeah, just keep focused. Go, look, this game is still winnable. I'm not dead. Yes, things have to go right for me rather than me having won the game. But, at the end of the day, you got to keep playing. By the way, in these post-board games, I didn't mention a lot of the sideboard cards. Eureka Moment is one I didn't talk about, but that card is...
It's a big growth spiral. And, well, we're seeing some slightly different sideboarding from the two players. We're seeing the Kling come in for LSV, but not for Matt Sperling.
Yeah, I do like Cling to Dust. I think in this matchup, I think it's just the thing, though, of if you're bringing in Cling, you're losing the Polukranos Unchained. So maybe that's Matt's call, right? Is at the end of the day, like, there's going to be less removal. And this 6/6 that escapes is a very relevant threat. So yes, Cling is better in this kind of counter draw matchup. But there's a possibility of me just playing Polukranos Unchained and being able to take over with that because there's just not a ton of answers to it.
So let's look at those opening hands. We have a keep from LSV. And, well, Matt is looking at a 1-lander here. Can't keep that into... Let's see. So there's just that Fabled Passage. It's like, if you secure another land...
Yeah, that
you can have that Wolf Willow Haven, but that is not looking good from the start for Matt.
Yeah, at 7, you definitely go down to 6. Matt is keeping this hand because fundamentally Matt has access to at least 2 lands in hand with Wolf Willow Haven and Cultivator. It's just that they require mana to cast. Luis might have a very easy time this game. Depending, you do have time. Like, your opponent does have to compound the advantage, which isn't always possible.
And this is just the pass right there. LSV is probably feeling good. And Matt Sperling just saying, hello. Hi, I have 1 land. Would you like to look at it? It's a forest. I made it myself. And, well, I haven't drawn any others. So, good game.
Yep. And Luis even has the Binding the Old Gods to get rid of Wolf Willow Haven if that becomes something.
That would be so brutal. And if there's like a Cultivate or anything of the sort, counter spells at the ready.
Yeah,
and
just cast the Epiphany here. Yeah,
that's not going to get a chance.
Yeah. But yeah, so here, Luis gets to... Does Luis get to do Ultimatum here? Let's see. Yes, because the Temple of Malady does allow it.
The Temple of Milady. So we've got the Vorinclex just going for the game winners here. The Tybalt and an Elrond's Epiphany. How many turns in a row should LSV be allowed to take?
I think that was enough turns, right? Matt kind of gave LSV it's 5 turns here.
And Swift Vengeance there. LSV cursing Matt's deck to not give any lands.
I mean, this can happen, right? Like, you take a calculated risk. Calculated risks don't mean that you always get there, because then it's not a calculated risk. It's just like, oh, great, I'll get there. Matt went, look, I'm mulliganing to 6. I don't want to mulligan to 5. I feel like this is a resource attrition battle in the post-board games. I have a lot of ramp, which is exactly what I need on the draw to win the game. All I'm lacking is lands. Hopefully I draw them. Didn't happen.
So this is the situation where I like to be playing a lot of best of one because I can just change my deck completely between games. I would just go ahead and add 5 lands there as a way to say, you did a bad job, deck. You didn't give me the lands. Statistically, you should have, but you didn't.
Matt still having mana problems, but in a different way this game. No blue mana. But you got Binding of the Old Gods that can get a Ketria Triome or Zagoth 1.
Yep, LSV plays a permanent is going to get wrecked by the Binding. And do you think that there is a case for playing the Binding not as removal, but only as ramp?
There's definitely a case to be made. I think it's fine for Matt to wait a turn here. But Luis is going to be able to Disdainful Stroke it. So, keep going up on mana.
Yep, so we're going to see the Binding coming out here, targeting that Wolf Willowhaven, trying to undo the ramp. But of course that Zagoth Triumph is able to tap for 2 mana there, and Disdainful Stroke stops the Binding in its tracks.
Yeah, and now, Luis, Matt has a handful of uncastable spells, and Luis has an Ultimatum. So it's looking really good for Luis. Also, maybe gets to 2 Binding the Old Gods on that Wolf Willowhaven and put Matt back. Probably could draw the Cure Best of Sea God, but I feel like with Ultimatum it's fine.
So we're just going to see a draw off the top of the deck, and it is lands. And LSV, I don't think minds having a ton of lands here. Can play Yorion next turn, and there's a blue source.
Yeah, basic island. Such a powerful card.
Game. Yes, but Yorion, if it lands, is going to get a lot of value here with those 2 omens as blank targets.
Yeah, the fact that Matt had to play the Eureka moment there and hope to draw another blue source. And unfortunately it didn't happen. So now this Yorion lands. It's a ton of card advantage.
And we're actually seeing the Wolf Willowhaven blinked as well because it can be moved onto this untapped land to hold up Heartless Act or any other interaction that gets drawn.
Like this Mystical Dispute.
Now, it only needs 1 mana, but still.
Yeah. The point is correct, right? Like, it could be a negate, and, you got to, at the end of the day, these Omen of the Seas are coming up. You got an Alrund's Epiphany. I mean, yeah, this resolves, but then you're looking for a blue source if you're Matt Sperling, and no other card, really. Maybe Emergent Ultimatum is something you'd keep. But yeah, and really this game came down to that. If Matt had blue mana, it'd be a lot closer, but doesn't. Cultivate, though.
Cultivate sets up Cure Best the Sea Gods. That's good stuff there.
Fortunately, Luis has a pretty spicy card in hand that is good. And thankfully for Matt, got to draw, the Cultivate does 2 things on top of ramping into that other blue source, does leave Mystical Dispute up. So now, Luis probably not going to go for the Emergent Ultimatum as a result because there's free mana up.
But you see that card that just got drawn? Starts with a K, ends with an Oma. Oh my God, it's Coma.
It is very powerful, and it makes sense here to land it.
Well, if you're worried about your opponent having a counter spell, play the uncounterable spell. I think the trouble with that is it does mean that you will be cut off from your own Mystical Dispute. And I think that Luis is going to be thinking ahead here and knowing I need to be ready for Matt to land either an Ultimatum or a Cure Best the Sea Gods here and respond. And being able to hold up enough mana to stop your opponent's Mystical Dispute on top of that.
Yeah, so I think that's where we're going to see Matt land the Yorion. It's a lot of advantage and value, and doesn't commit you. Plus, you get to keep up Dispute plus free mana up. I think if Luis disputes this, it's very close on Matt to actually pay. I think Matt would, though, because you still get to keep up disputes. So yeah, I mean, both Yorions have done a lot of value here. Plus, I mean, it's also a 4-mana card with that Wolf Willow Haven, super powerful.
I get you a little mana refund there. That's some sweet stuff. And we just saw the Seagate come down. Got bolted in, took 3 damage to have it come in untapped. And that's going to line up for a lot of mana here. There is actually 6 mana at Matt's disposal. That's enough to use a Mystical Dispute, cast an Omen, sacrifice an Omen, all sorts of choices. Maybe even cycle that Triome. Oh, and an Emergent Ultimatum off one of those draws.
But I still can't understate how powerful that Cultivate was for Matt. Like it basically turned the game
the extra
from
blue. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at how much like the problem that you have, right, when you're missing a color and you have a bunch of spells, isn't that like you draw your land and you're good. It's you can still only cast 1 spell a turn. So Cultivate kind of acting as a super ramp spell here because it basically turns you from 1 spell a turn to free. And that completely changes the texture of the game.
There's enough mana now to play the Coma, hold up the Dispute.
Yeah, Luis here maybe concerned about a. I
was going to say you're getting out of the range where Dispute is being very helpful because tapping out with this much mana isn't as big. So here comes Coma. Yeah. And of course, if you try to cast a counterspell on Coma, it will actually just highlight and show you nothing is happening here. And what Matt needs is a Heartless Act. If you kill Coma before there's another Serpent, you're good. But you know who's a Serpent? Yorion.
Yeah, Yorion. I was gonna mention
that. Yorion is the Sky Nomad. Is actually a bird serpent. Yeah, we saw the quick highlight there. Like, gotta double check. Yeah, that's my bird.
I feel like maybe you still fire it off here on Coma.
Yeah, make them get rid of their flyer.
Yeah, like you're gonna lose the Yorion anyway. But yeah, there's the priority. So. It is kind of funny. Matt knows this isn't like. I don't think this is surprising, Matt. You can see it on the facial expression. Nothing happened there.
And Coma making the snake.
Yeah, so
I should actually be very clear. Snakes and serpents are different creature types in Magic the Gathering. Naga and Lamia are also different creature types in Magic the Gathering. You cannot use any of them for Coma's abilities.
Yeah. So Luis kind of giving up lethal, but going like fundamentally, I don't think that this turn is going to pass with like Coma and the Serpent. So I'm just going to prevent this. Matt has access to 8 mana, but doesn't have triple green anyways. So uses it up because you're going to need green to cast this Ultimatum. You could cast the Cure of Best the Sea God here. But it does run into Mystical Dispute, so that's why you see the land kept on top. Could also fire off a Duress first because Dispute is more powerful, but Luis is also setting up for the Emergent Ultimatum here. But with access to, and you know, I mean, Matt does have the Dispute for Ultimatum, but doesn't get to do much else. So I think here the Duress is going to get fired off because compared to Dispute, you get the information, you get to see what's going on. And this is a tough call. You can take the Ultimatum, mostly going like, look, there's a Dispute. I'm just going to trade one of my 7 mana spells for this. Or you could take the Dispute and, but let's see. The problem here is we can't cast Ultimatum. So you're looking at casting Cure Best the Sea God, but you only have 6 mana. Well, going to 7 with the pathway. So at that point, you're then running into Luis's Ultimatum. So have to pass and scry, which is really not ideal.
No, and now there is a Coma going unchecked on this battlefield. And with Matt only at 9 life, this is only going to take 2 swings to kill.
Actually, Luis has lethal if he just plays that Epiphany.
Oh, right. There is
and
a
the Fabled Passage.
Foretold Epiphany. And there we go, enough mana on the battlefield with that Fabled Passage to stop a Mystical Dispute. So we're going to see the Passage correct. Grabbing a basic land, it comes in untapped, and the 3 mana can be played.
Yeah, this game was fascinating in a lot of ways. Essentially, it came down to, Luis got to compound had an early advantage because Matt couldn't find blue mana. Matt got to erase that advantage eventually thanks to getting the blue source, Eureka Moment, Cultivate, and kind of catching back up. But by that point, Luis had leverage that Yorion and had a few turns. And that's what really allowed this Coma to run away with the game, is that combination of things beforehand, because Luis got to draw more lands, got to have a Yorion in play. Matt wasn't able to respond to it, because Matt could have, with blue mana, fired off a dispute, stopped the Yorion, and that would have stopped Luis in his tracks or played his own. And that basically is what made this game happen.
So here comes the extra turn. And a good game.
Yep.
That was a friendly handshake across the table. The